You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon, and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Introduction. The year 1816 is often referred to as the year without a summer, due to remarkable climatic disturbances that led to a significant drop in average global temperatures, somewhere between 0.4 and 0.7 degrees Celsius, or 0.7 to 1 degree Fahrenheit. This resulted in Europe experiencing some of the coldest summer weather recorded between the years 1766 and 2000, which in turn led to widespread crop destruction and substantial food scarcities throughout the Northern Hemisphere. It's believed that these abnormal weather patterns were primarily due to a volcanic winter brought on by the enormous eruption of Mount Tambora in April 1815 in what is now known as Indonesia. This volcanic event was the biggest to have occurred in over 1,300 years, and possibly since the suggested eruption in 536 that also caused a volcanic winter. The already dire climatic conditions may have been further worsened by another eruption, that of Mount Mayon in the Philippines in 1814. Background. In 1816, a phenomenon known as the Year Without a Summer led to widespread crop failures, and it is considered by historian John D. Post as the final significant food scarcity event in the Western world. This environmental crisis mainly impacted the northeastern United States, Atlantic Canada, and parts of Western Europe. The prime cause of this unusually cold year was attributed to a volcanic winter resulting from the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in April 1815. This eruption was particularly massive, categorized as a level 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, and is known to have thrown more than 100 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the sky. It stands as the most substantial eruption of its kind in recent history. In addition to Mount Tambora, several other substantial volcanic explosions occurred around the same period, contributing further to the atmospheric dust and subsequent cooling. An unidentified eruption happened in the southwestern Pacific Ocean in 1808. La Soufriere volcano on St. Vincent in the Caribbean erupted in 1812. In the same year, Mount Awu in the Sangihe Islands of what is now Indonesia also erupted. In 1813, Suwano Sejima in Japan's Ryukyu Islands saw volcanic activity. Mayon volcano in the Philippines erupted in 1814. The accumulation of dust from these eruptions contributed to a global temperature decline, effectively blocking out sunlight and leading to a short-term decrease in the Earth's average land temperature by about 1 degree Celsius post-Tambora eruption, based on Berkeley Earth's 2012 analysis. The colder temperatures following the 1812-1814 eruptions were part of this trend as well. All this took place during an already cooler period known as the Little Ice Age, which started in the 14th century and had consistently influenced European agriculture negatively. The Tambora eruption exacerbated the cooling effects of the Little Ice Age. Additionally, this cold snap coincided with the Dalton minimum, a period of low solar activity from around 1790 to 1830. In May 1816, solar activity dipped to a historically low level, known through the Wolf number, the measurement of sunspots. However, the scientific community has not fully determined the connection between solar activity and Earth's climate, so it is unclear whether the low solar activity directly contributed to the cooler temperatures during that time. Africa. While there haven't been direct observations regarding the weather in the Sahel area, indications from neighboring regions suggest there's been more rain than usual. In contrast, the coastal areas to the south of the Sahel in West Africa probably saw less rainfall than is typical. During the winter months of the southern hemisphere, strong weather disturbances hit the coast of South Africa. Specifically, on the 29th and 30th of July in 1816, a fierce tempest struck close to Cape Town, bringing with it powerful winds from the north and hail. This storm resulted in significant destruction to the vessels in the area. Asia. The typical monsoon pattern in China was disrupted, leading to severe flooding in the region of the Yangtze Valley. At Fort Shuangcheng, the cold damaged agricultural fields, and the difficult conditions prompted some of the military recruits to abandon their posts. Unexpected summer snow or mixed forms of precipitation were observed in parts of Jiangxi and Anhui provinces. In Taiwan, snowfall was recorded in Hsinchu and Miaoli, while Changhua experienced frost. These abnormal weather events contributed to a devastating famine in Yunnan, which weakened the ruling Qing dynasty's control. In India, the summer monsoon arrived late, causing heavy rains to hit later in the season. This intensified the cholera outbreak, which spread from the Ganges region in Bengal all the way to Moscow. During Bengal's winter monsoon, there were uncommon reports of cold weather and snow. Meanwhile, in Japan, memories of the recent Great Tenmai famine from 1782 to 1788 made the population wary. But despite the cold weather affecting the harvest, there were no reports of crop failures, nor any significant negative impacts on the population from the weather conditions. Europe. A string of volcanic eruptions in the early 19th century, culminating with Mount Tambora's explosion in 1815, triggered several years of poor agricultural yields. Europe was already recovering from the ravages of the Napoleonic Wars when it faced its most severe famine of the 100-year period. This natural disaster led to abnormally cold and wet weather conditions across the region, ruining crops in countries like Great Britain and Ireland. In Ireland, a significant failure of essential crops such as wheat, oats, and potatoes resulted in widespread starvation, particularly in the northern and southwestern regions. As a result, food costs soared across Europe. At that time, the specific reasons for these agricultural failures weren't understood, leading to public unrest. Crowds gathered to protest in front of grain markets and bakeries, and numerous European cities were rocked by food riots. These disturbances were particularly intense during 1816 and 1817, marking the most violent period of civil unrest since the French Revolution. Concomitantly, from 1816 to 1819, famine conditions helped fuel major outbreaks of typhus across various European regions, including Ireland, Italy, Switzerland, and Scotland. The epidemic led to the deaths of over 65,000 people, spreading viciously from Ireland. Historical temperature records indicate that this time frame included some of the coldest years, specifically the 11th coldest year, the 3rd coldest summer, and the chilliest July in England since records began in 1659. The aftermath of the eruptions also caused extraordinary environmental phenomena, such as floods from swollen rivers and unusual snowfalls tinged with volcanic ash in Hungary and red snow in northern Italy. In Switzerland, the cold was so extreme in the summers of 1816 and 1817 that it caused a large ice dam to form from a glacier in the Val de Bangs, leading to a temporary lake. Despite the proactive measures taken by engineer Ignaz Venetz to alleviate the pressure by draining the lake, the ice dam eventually broke in June 1818. The resulting deluge destroyed the surrounding area and claimed the lives of 40 people. North America. During the spring and summer of 1816, areas in the eastern United States experienced an unusual dry fog, which had the effect of reddening sunlight and reducing its brightness to the point where people could spot sunspots with their unaided eyes. This phenomenon, later described by Clive Oppenheimer as a high-altitude veil of sulfate aerosols, could not be cleared by the wind or rain. Although residents used to harsh winters did not initially find the weather troublesome, the real struggle arose from its impact on agriculture, leading to limited availability of food and firewood. The toughest situation was in elevated areas where farming conditions were already challenging. Crops suffered immensely due to the cold, with frost in May destroying a significant portion of the harvest across the higher grounds of several states, including Massachusetts and Vermont. Snow fell in early June in New York and Maine, with a succession of frosty nights causing major damage to crops in New Jersey towards the end of the month. While some fruit and vegetable yields managed to survive in New England, corn crops fared terribly, with only a quarter deemed fit for consumption. Widespread crop failure, extending to Canada and parts of Europe, drove up food prices significantly. People's daily records from that year paint a grim picture of the agricultural disaster. For example, Sarah Snell Bryant noted the delayed seasonal transition, and Nicholas Bennett from a Shaker community documented the repeated freezing spells that devastated their crops. Ice was spotted on lakes and rivers as far south as Pennsylvania in the middle of summer, and frost was reported in Virginia in late August. Prices for basic foodstuffs like oats skyrocketed, in part because the infrastructure for transporting goods, such as roads, waterways, and railroads, was either non-existent or very poor, making it difficult to bring in food from elsewhere. This period is marked by accounts like those of Thomas Jefferson, who, having retired from public life, faced financial strain from crop losses. Newspapers at the time conveyed the bleakness, noting not only the cold conditions, but also the despair it brought to their expectations for the harvest. Additionally, Maryland saw snowfall mixed with volcanic ash in various colors, serving as a stark reminder of the far-reaching impacts of global atmospheric disturbances on local environments and communities. South America. A recent report from Liverpool has detailed severe drought conditions afflicting the tropical areas of Brazil, particularly between Pernambuco and Rio de Janeiro, as observed on February 8, 1817. The drought has led to the desiccation of local water sources, resulting in widespread death among livestock and forcing residents to relocate in search of water along major rivers. The region is facing extreme hardship with a lack of food supplies and the inability to process grain, as the drought has rendered water-powered mills inoperable and there are no wind-powered alternatives. There's an urgency to import flour, prompting ships to travel from Pernambuco to the United States. Complicating matters, the coastal trade routes are disrupted by fears of conflict with Buenos Aires, further exacerbating the dire situation. Societal effects. After Mount Tambora erupted, a substantial amount of volcanic ash spread into the atmosphere, which shaded the sky for an extended period and intensified the redness of sunsets. This phenomenon was reflected in artworks from that era, where the intense red shades were absent before the eruption, and the artworks began to represent gloomier scenes, even under the illumination of the sun and moon. Artworks like Caspar David Friedrich's The Monk by the Sea and Two Men by the Sea captured the darker emotional tone of the time. Research conducted in 2007, examining art from between 1500 and 1900, found that times of volcanic activity coincided with an increase in the use of red pigment in paintings. This was a result of unique sunsets brought on by volcanic ash in the atmosphere, influencing artists such as J.M.W. Turner, whose works like Chichester Canal carried a characteristic yellow glow. This type of sunlight tinting was also observed following the Krakatoa eruption in 1883 and after Mount Pinatubo's eruption in 1991 on the U.S. West Coast. The scarcity of oats, which were essential for feeding horses, possibly spurred Karl Dreiss, a German inventor, to explore alternative methods of transportation without horses, eventually creating the early forms of bicycles known as the Draisine and velocipede. The disastrous crop failures in 1816, known as the Year Without a Summer, provoked mass migration within the United States. Hopeful for more favorable living conditions, many moved from New England to western regions like New York and the Northwest Territory. This movement coincided with Indiana and Illinois achieving statehood in 1816 and 1818, respectively. Lawrence Goldman, a British historian, suggested that this migration also centralized the abolitionist movement in upstate New York, known as the Burned-Over District. L.D. Stilwell, another historian, noted that the state of Vermont experienced a dramatic loss in population in these years, reversing several years of growth. It was during this time that Joseph Smith's family relocated from Vermont to New York, setting off a chain of events leading to the foundation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. During the incessantly rainy summer of 1816, Mary Shelley and her literary companions were confined indoors on their Swiss vacation, ultimately turning to storytelling to entertain themselves. This led to the creation of iconic literary works, with Shelley writing Frankenstein and Byron composing A Fragment. which would inspire Polidori's The Vampire, a forerunner to Dracula. These indoor days were remembered for opium use and engrossing discussions, with one such discussion inspiring Mary Shelley's vision of Frankenstein. Byron, influenced by the dark times of The Year Without a Summer, penned the poem Darkness, mirroring the grim atmosphere of that period. Lastly, Justus von Liebig, who suffered through the famine as a child, would later invest in studying plant nutrition and introduce the use of mineral fertilizers, aiding future agricultural resiliency.